Welcome to the 11th Annual Ethics Speaker Presentation, sponsored by the Team Mark Futter Program on Ethics and Leadership and Integrity in Action at Bay Path University. This year, our focus is on the ethics of food. I'm Alicia Murphy. I'm a junior studying cybersecurity and minoring in mathematics here, and I'll be your host for this afternoon's event. Today, we're looking forward to hearing from three speakers who have had firsthand experience in the local area working to improve access to fresh, nutritious, and affordable food, and on the issue of food justice in the surrounding area. But first, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about the ethics program at Bay Path, through which our students take responsibility for their own actions, leading to mutual trust and the opportunity for personal growth, as well as the gentleman who founded it. Thomas Mark Futter was born in Germany in 1921. Escaping anti-Semitism in the 1940s, he moved to the United States. In 1970, Mark and his family moved to Northampton, Massachusetts, where he became a local business leader and a generous supporter of the arts and education in the Pioneer Valley. After founding this program at Bay Path in 2006, he attended the first few events in this annual speaker series before his death at age 90 in 2011. We're honored to have two members of Mr. Futter's family here with us this afternoon, his nephew, John Futter, and John's daughter, Catherine, now a Bay Path senior. I'm also pleased to acknowledge two other members of our audience today, Angelica Milan, Leadership Giving Officer at Bay Path, who worked directly with Mr. Futter in establishing this program, and Bay Path's Provost, Dr. Melissa Morris Olson, an enthusiastic supporter of and participant in this program. Please join me in thanking them. Before I introduce our speakers, Bay Path University President Dr. Carol Leary would like to say a few words. President Leary?
Thank you, Alicia. I'll come right up here and also extend a warm welcome to this wonderful group that's here today to, I know, enjoy the presentations of all of our panelists. But Alicia and I have a very special relationship because we traveled 1 week together in Ireland during spring break. She was a model student and never went to any of the pubs. So with that, I would like to say thank you to our panelists, but most especially to Mike Moran and to Ann Dobmeyer. Ann is not here with us right now, but she'll be joining us at 4:30 because she's teaching her own ethics class at the moment. But Ann Dobmeyer, who is our assistant provost, and Mike Moran, who is the director of all of our libraries across the Commonwealth, are the two individuals that I really credit with putting together the program every year. And to have John and Catherine here, it just makes it so special for us. And when Catherine decided to become a student at Bay Path, and she also traveled with me to Ireland in March during spring break, we were thrilled that you could see Mark Futter's impression and impact again and again every year. I want to say one thing about Mark. You heard about his life. When I first met him, I was immediately taken with his compassion. Probably that was the most significant characteristic of Mark. And secondly, he had a wicked, wicked sense of humor. But his compassion because of what he had gone through during the Holocaust and his true appreciation for being an American here in the Northampton area. And he always gave back. As a very successful businessman, he obviously accumulated wealth, and he wanted that wealth to work on behalf of others. And so when Mark wanted to do something at Bay Path, we thought immediately of the Ethics and Leadership Program. And so year after year now, and when we now realize it's been 11 years, we have brought together incredible speakers to share with us on a range of topics their opinions and perspectives on ethics. And in today's world, at any time in our history, no matter what the political scene is, ethics are an important foundation for how we all must act as citizens in our country and in our communities. So they say that if you say the name and if you remember through programs like this someone who has passed on, they will live forever. Mark Futter will live forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Leary. And now I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Elizabeth Ogilvie serves as board chair of the Youth Development Urban Agricultural Organization, Gardening the Community, chair of the Springfield Food Policy Council, and as project advisor with the team that developed and is implementing the 2015 Massachusetts State Food System Plan. Her work in the food system, public health, and community building is based on lessons learned from her earlier work in affordable housing and workforce and economic development. Liz is a critical thinker about issues relating to class, race, gender, culture, and privilege. She is quite comfortable with the discomfort attached to conversations about race, equating it to exercise, or as she puts it, a requirement for good health and something that gets easier the more we do it. Liz's work is varied. She spends the spring and summer months as a school-based gardening teacher and market manager for the City Soul Farmers Market. She also works with social justice organizations, schools, and universities across the country on undoing systemic racism and personally mediated biases. She is, excuse me, sorry, I lost my place. She is determined to improve the social determinants of health in her community while avoiding her public school teacher husband Ed's rhetorical question, how many jobs do you have now and do any of them actually pay you? Liz.
So the most important thing about that introduction is my husband's rhetorical question, which he asks me on a regular basis. I have a pretty interesting pathway to the world of food, and I'll tell you about it. First, I would really, really like to thank Bay Path. Bay Path, for me, I'm someone who was born in Springfield, lived there as a child, went away to be educated, came back as an adult, left again, quite honestly, because it did not seem like a place of opportunity, and as the first person in my family to go beyond high school, it was important to make money because I had younger brothers and sisters, and it was important to demonstrate what that college education meant. My father was enlisted in the Air Force and worked with his hands his whole life and worked very, very hard. And in addition to being enlisted in the Air Force, he worked as a custodian on a university campus. And I am going to tell a little story, and I won't weep, and hope that she won't weep, but Bay Path has become really important to me. I didn't know about it when I was young. I didn't even know about it when I was old, but I found out about it because of a good friend, someone who's become a good friend in a very short amount of time, Professor Charlotte Briggs. And I still always forget how we got connected, but somehow we connected. She was teaching her class on food system, knew that I worked in food systems, and asked me to come and be a guest, and I kind of came and haven't really left since. And it's been a magnificent opportunity. I've taught at the university level. I taught at the University of Chicago. And I remember sharing a cab with a professor once when I just started at the university and was really intimidated by being there. And I asked him, you know, how much do you like teaching at this school? And he said, oh, I love it. I love it because the students know a lot. Sometimes they know more than we do, and they're not afraid to show it. The difference between the University of Chicago students and the Bay Path students are just that the Bay Path students are just beginning to understand that it's okay to show it. The students that I've experienced in Charlotte's classroom know a lot. And it's not just academic knowledge, it's this lived life. When we've been talking about food heritage and food sovereignty and food access, these have been young people who grew up in farming families. Many of them were young people who grew up in families who themselves experienced food insecurity. Some were young people who didn't recognize that what they experienced was not a lack on the part of their family, but really a lack on the part of the food system. And so it's been profound to share these last 2 semesters of experience. And because of the connection that I made through Charlotte, Bay Path was very generous to Guarding the Community, one of the organizations I'm going to tell you about. And we got to be the recipients of this wonderful giving that's associated with the Christmas lunch or the holiday luncheon that the faculty and the alumni faculty host in December. And at that luncheon, I was unexpectedly moved to my core, because one of the things that President Leary did was acknowledge the staff who we don't traditionally see sometimes in our work. It were the people in my mind who hold up the university, the people who work in facilities. And because I had grown up with a man who went to that second job for 20 years to ensure that I could go to college, I knew how tired he came home. I knew how invisible he felt. And so when I saw the faces of those people receive that acknowledgement and that gift, I was moved to tears. And I want to weep now telling you about it. And I took that thank you for my father. So President Leary, that was an amazing gift that I will never forget for the rest of my life. Provost, thank you so much for having us. Michael, I can't believe that you invited me back after the first talk and after you sat through lunch with me. And to the Futter family, thank you so much for making this possible. I love talking to academics and young people for the same and for 2 different reasons. One, academics can tell a story with many, many words in a way to an audience that might not listen to me. And young people are the people I count on to take the lessons that we might share today and do something with them. I will tell you at the beginning of this talk, I don't care what you do in food. I don't care if you suddenly stop eating meat. I don't care if you only eat grass-fed beef and free-range chickens. I don't care where you shop. I would love it if all of those things change. But most importantly, I hope that you'll hear something that will spark something in you that will make you want to be an agent of change, regardless of how old you find yourselves to be. So when talking about food and the ethics of food, there are many, many ways to think about it. It could be the practical from our food choices, from deciding not to buy a tomato in winter. And I've made that decision only because I just can't stand the way they taste, and I like lusting for them all through the winter months and then waiting for that fresh grown tomato. It might be deciding where you buy your meat or what kind of meat you're going to buy, or deciding not to buy any meat. It might be having a really intellectual conversation that some of my friends who live north of what we call the tofu curtain, that would mean anywhere north of Holyoke, it might be sitting in a room kind of like this and pontificating about food. That would be Sarah. And another speaker might talk to you about those things, but that's not who we are. So today's talk is going to be about labor, and it's going to be about immigration, and it's going to be about public health. In my introduction, she mentioned that I'm working on changing the social determinants of health. And for those who don't have a public health background, the easiest way to think about what social determinants are the places where we live, eat, work, and play. And for children, those last 3 are often very much the same place, and that would be their schools. And if you know anything about school food, it's just not a happy picture. But that picture is built on a construct of race. And so I am comfortable talking about race. And when we talk about our food system, you'll hear very famous people talk about the food system being broken. And I disagree with them. The food system works exactly as it was set up to work. It was created in this country, on this continent, to produce the most amount of wealth based on the labor of those least valued for those who were considered to be most valued, with the least valued being people who looked like me, and that was after the land was stolen from people who looked like Neftali. And the people who were most valued were, I don't know if they even identified in this way, but we would think of them as heterosexual white men. And unfortunately, things haven't changed dramatically. And right now, if you look at where we find ourselves nationally, while I don't believe that everyone who voted the way they voted intended for that to be the outcome, that is kind of what it looks like on TV if you watch the news. And we have to tell the truth about that if we're going to do anything to really change it. We can't talk about changing the foundation of something, and that would, for us, in thinking about food, be the soil, without first making sure the soil was healthy. And so the roots that we have planted in the food system have really been planted in unhealthy soil. And so I want to ask you to keep a couple of questions in your head as you listen to Sarah talk about it from a public health perspective, and Neftali will give you lots of big facts and talk to you about it from the perspective that he works in. I want to ask you to keep an open mind, and if you feel uncomfortable, stretch and stand up and walk around, because this may be a talk that feels a little bit different than other talks that you've had. I want to tell you a little bit about the health disparities in my neighborhood. I live in the Mason Square area of Springfield. Some of those of us who are of a certain age will remember that it used to be called the Winchester Square area, and it was named after the Winchester rifle. But it is the area that is the heart of Springfield. It is the most racially mixed. It is also a place where we have houses that sell for $400,000, literally 2 blocks away from houses that sell for $25,000. We have the highest, some of the highest median incomes and some of the lowest. Within a mile and 3/4 of my house are 10 McDonald's. There is not a grocery store within 2.5 miles. And we have one farmer's market, and the only reason I'm a farmer's market manager is because we had no farmer's markets. And a question that my father told me to ask myself when I was 10, I have it written on a blackboard in my dining room, and it is, what do you really, really want, and what are you really, really willing to do to make it happen? And I wanted us to have a farmer's market and fresh produce, and I didn't have any money in the Food Policy Council budget to pay for that, so I thought Saturdays that would be a good way to spend my time with my son, who had a lemonade stand and made $176 last summer, so he did much better than his mother. But we started that farmer's market because there is no grocery store and there's no access to fresh produce. We have the highest diabetes rates for African Americans and Latino in the state, and in the country, the highest birth rates, premature birth rates, and early childhood death for nutrition-related reasons attached to the mom. And so what that means is more black women in Springfield have preterm pregnancies, pregnancies that end earlier than 40 weeks, and their babies die sooner because the mothers did not get the nutrition they need. That is just crazy. I can't even come up with a fantastic academic word. It makes absolutely no sense in a state that prides itself on being at the front of the healthcare conversation, being at the front of the academic conversation. We have premier academic institutions, and we can't solve that problem. And so after years as an investment banker, because I had debt and had to make money and wanted to do some nice things for my parents, and then years building affordable housing, and then years working on economic development and workforce development, I decided to chew on food for a while, literally and figuratively, because our food system is a microcosm of our country. It's completely capitalistic. And along the way, it hasn't just marginalized those people that I illuminated earlier. Family farmers are some of the lowest paid, most uninsured, most sick, most financially precarious people in our country, and many of them are white. And so now we have this system that is just not working for anyone. And so what can we do? And so locally, what I work on, guarding the community, is, in short, we teach kids how to farm in the city. We have empty lots the city has allowed us to use. I'll project until we figure that out. And we have lots that benevolent landlords who don't want to take care of the land that they have let us use, and we basically farm in the city, and kids learn how to do everything from test the soil to harvest the vegetables. They sell in farm stands, they work at the farmer's market that I manage, and they have farm stands that they manage. We have a CSA, which is a community share of agriculture, where people buy boxes of food on a sliding scale. So we have families who pay as little as $10 a week, and they get a box of organic food that they can feed their family on for a week. And when they pick up their food, we have healthy food cooking demonstrations right on our farm sites. And so last year we fed 75 families, which doesn't sound like a lot, but 3 years ago we weren't feeding anybody. And so those 75 families are all bought in to our organization in the same way that BayPath is now bought in. And they see themselves in the partners of sustainability along the way. Young people are learning entrepreneurial skills. They are learning community organizing skills. We go out and knock on doors. They are building really effective peer relationships. And I am very proud to say Renaissance High School is our #1 high school in Springfield. It is ranked in the state. 2 years ago, it was like number 52. So we're competing with really, really good schools in really affluent areas. And the top 3 graduates were all young people who were enrolled in Guarding the Community, and they went to Swarthmore, Emory, and George Washington University. So we are also producing scholars. But the most profound thing that we're doing is helping Black and Latino kids reconcile their agrarian histories with agriculture. Black people are pretty ambivalent about farming. My father thinks I have lost my mind. His mother was a sharecropper. My grandmother, her grandmother was a slave. And now I garden, and I don't even really get paid to do that. But for me, I hear the whispers of my grandmother's voices when I put my hands in the soil. I hear the whispers of the neighbors. When I grew up in Mason Square as a small child, my neighborhood was still racially mixed. I don't know how much I believe in integration. I don't know where you live, but think about the neighborhood you live in. I think that integration is probably the 5 minutes between the first Black person moving in and the last white person moving out. And that's just the truth that we sometimes need to tell about our cities and our countries. And I'll tell you lots of things that seem somber and sad, but in every one of them, there is a place of opportunity. Because if that is true, if you notice that about your neighborhood, then there's probably a person of color or two that maybe you haven't spoken to. And so that's a takeaway from this talk. Think about the places where you shop. Think about the people that you pass. Think about the people who serve you. Think about the hands who feed you and the hands who feed us. For those who are students on this campus, pay attention to the young people and the older people who are working in food service, who would probably give anything to trade places with any of you. Some of them look like you, some of them don't. I've eaten lunch here. You have food service staff from every ethnic group and every age group. To get through the day and a job like that, you have to love the people that you work with. You have to feel valued and loved at the place that you're at. And sometimes you attach your dream to the young person going through the line who looks like you. So the next time someone gives you a plate or a tray, look in their face and recognize your aunt. Recognize your mother, recognize your sister, recognize mine if you don't recognize your own. Those are ethical choices. We can make these big ethical choices with our money, and we can make little teeny ethical choices with our pathway. So I'm gonna stop talking for a while and let Sarah talk to you, and then let Neftali talk to you, and then I'll pull us all back together. But I'm gonna give you 2 questions to think about. I want you to think about who is least impacted by the food system. Who benefits the most from the food system? And as you listen to them and they give you statistics and they talk to you about their work, try to think about the people who could be more impacted, who could benefit, and what your space, what your walk could do to shift that.
Well, you're special today. Okay. So thank you so much, Liz. That was so inspiring. So our next speaker is Neftali Duran, who leads the Nuestra Comida project. Okay, so I'm so sorry if I messed it up. Um, at Nuestra Raíces, a grassroots urban agricultural Oh, you gonna go next? You wanna go next? Okay. You have to go next? Who wants to go next? You wanna go next? Okay. Let me talk about Sarah. Hold on. Okay. Nope. Okay, here we go. Okay. So, Sarah Benkert, who has worked in the field of public health for the past 10 years to create healthier communities by supporting community led processes for change. She has been involved in all aspects of the change process, including assessment and data collection, program design, program implementation, evaluation, and organizational capacity building. Through each of these elements, Sarah brings a passion for community led efforts that center around the voices and actions of people who experience the greatest burden of health disparities in our community. Sarah has worked with Nuestra Raíces and the Holyoke Food and Fitness Policy Council on a multi year grant that built community leadership to transform the food system and built environment in Holyoke, Massachusetts. She currently manages Healthy Hampshire, a regional community health collaboration that works with municipal and community leaders to promote access to healthy foods and opportunities for physical activity in Hampshire County and the Hill Towns. Sarah's educational background is rooted in public health, social justice, nutrition and food access. She graduated from Hampshire College in 2003 and in 2008 received a master's degree in public health from UMass Amherst with a concentration in community health education. Sarah. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So, thank you for that introduction, and thank you, Liz, for asking me to be here. It's actually great to be here, and just even the process of thinking about what is an ethical food system was an interesting question for me to consider. And I don't actually have an answer to that, but I'll share a little bit of my background, my story, and just a little bit of my work. And hopefully something in there will inspire you. So I work currently in the field of public health, specifically community health education and development, but I took a very interesting path to get here. So I grew up in rural upstate New York. My parents owned a restaurant. My brothers and I grew up working there. Later, it went out of business, as many restaurants and food businesses do. And my dad worked in many kitchens over the years. And when I would go and visit him, I would work in that kitchen. So I've had a lot of restaurant jobs growing up. And my inspiration for going into the field of public health came from working the overnight shift at a bakery for over 3 years in my 20s. I thought maybe if I got out of the kitchen and went into the bakery, it would be like easier. It was probably even harder in a way because of the night shift and the heavy lifting and everything like that. But the delicious bread. But actually, the scene I encountered at the bakery I worked at, which was actually a medium-sized facility with a lot of machines. So we did a lot of artisanal baked handmade goods, but we also did a lot of like high production, rolls and things like that. And so we were working a lot with machines. I saw a lot of occupational hazards there. People got injured a lot. I was injured. There was a culture there of bullying from the boss. People were, I would say, fairly low paid, and also, just wanting to share a little story of one of my coworkers who had a severe health complication. His name was Wally. He worked as a bagel baker. He had advanced diabetes, and he wasn't managing it well. On the job, he developed a foot infection over many months. He encased it in something that looked like a ski boot to try to heal it while he was on the job. It didn't work. He really needed to take a couple weeks off from work and just heal this infection, but he couldn't spare the money because he would be getting 2/3 pay from short-term disability. I heard that he lived in a trailer with no running water. So anyway, he just kept working, and one day he didn't come in, and we learned that he had gone to the hospital because he actually had chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder on top of the diabetes. So he was in the ICU for a month, and during that time, his foot actually healed, ironically. And he actually didn't end up coming back. He wasn't able to. He went on a different track and was able, I think, to get some kind of disability to live on. But the interesting thing about this story is just like that cycle that I think a lot of people are often trapped in low-wage, very labor-intensive jobs where they really can't get out of that cycle because there's no support for them. And if this is kind of a riff off my talk, but if you think about the cost of providing ICU care for someone for 1 month, that probably equaled like his lifetime's salary from like 20 years or something like that. So our food system, I think, really rests on the backs of us workers. And I don't work in food service anymore, but I consider myself very much a homegrown part of that because of my family's experiences. And so anyway, I went into a master's degree in public health at the University of Massachusetts Amherst because I really wanted to work on specifically creating a more fair and equitable food system. Liz talked about, the very system was built actually to be inequitable by design. And I possibly somewhat too optimistically hope it's possible to change that. I think we definitely tweak it. We do need revolutionary change in the food system, but that's kind of another, maybe later for as we get into our discussion. And so through public health, there are many ways that we can work at least on the tweaks and hopefully get to some of the root causes. I thought I would, work in occupational health, but I ended up working really on the consumer side. So the food system has many aspects to it, as you've already heard reference, and really the consumer side is more around access. So we're looking at what kinds of healthy, affordable, culturally relevant food do like you as an individual have at your disposal through the various places that you might get food throughout your day, week, or year. And really working on that piece of the food system. Of course, it's all interlinked, and I work in collaboration with a lot of other groups on the other aspects as well. So our food system is very good at delivering highly addictive, shelf-stable food made by corporations that have lots of money to pour into marketing budgets. And lobbying efforts to make sure that governmental policies are in their favor. And our food system is not good at providing actual, real, like whole food, fruits, vegetables, minimally processed food. It's not good at ensuring those foods are grown on farms that use regenerative practices that don't deplete the soil. Or farms that provide decent wages and benefits for workers. And it is by design, as Liz said, and federal policy is largely responsible, I would say, for that. But I still believe that the food system can be changed in a way that works for people. And it's really important to me personally that the people impacted, specifically people who are negatively impacted by the food system, are in control and the drivers of the solutions. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that plays out in my work. I don't know who originally said it. I hear this version of this quote many times, and I hope that someday I'll figure out who said this, but communities that are most negatively impacted are the ones that are closest to the solutions. And so that's kind of the ethic I think that I take in my work, and probably fail at every day, to be quite honest. It's an ideal that needs to be constantly reached for. So let me share a couple stories. So currently my job looks like this. I work in 14 different communities in Hampshire and Hampden County. The communities in Hampden County are the little tiny hill towns, Blandford, Russell, Chester, places like that. And so I have this interesting mix of, kind of somewhat affluent, small cities in Hampshire County, and then the hill towns, which are sort of one big food desert in some ways. There's very few food sites there, and very, very little focus on that as a region. And so what we try to do is increase access to healthy food. Another piece of my job is around physical activity. The premise is for this work is that people are getting sick from diseases that are largely preventable through changes in diet and physical activity. But in my opinion, and the research sort of bears this out, it's really not effective just to go around and tell people, like, you need to eat healthier. Who likes being told that? I really don't like being told that. And also, if you can't actually find that healthy food, it's quite patronizing. And so what we really look at is how to change community environments so that the 10 McDonald's in, I don't work specifically in Springfield, but as an example, the 10 McDonald's, are not the predominant food source, and instead it's a grocery store. And there are many ways to do that, and it's a long road to make that happen because a lot of these are, based on decades of policy and municipal planning, and also a culture around how we do things, which is often based in a lot of individual and institutional racism and classism. So just to make it really concrete, if you live in a neighborhood with well-maintained sidewalks and safe crosswalks, you're more likely to walk places, whether that be to school, to work, to the store, or just recreation. Similarly, if you live in an area with multiple affordable options for healthy food, you will simply have an easier time obtaining that food. And so this is how we think about this in public health. There's probably people in public health who are out there trying to convince each person to eat healthier, but that's not really my approach, and that is not one that I would endorse. So we really look at the whole community and think, how can we create a healthy community where people don't even quite know they're making the healthy choice, maybe because it's just the one that's easier to make. I think that's really the gold standard here, and again, ideals here. In some ways, we're doing it bit by bit in some places. I will give an example, at least, of this idea of engaging the communities that are most negatively affected in solutions and how that plays out in the actual process of my work. So right now, we are in Hampshire County. We did a food assessment where we gathered a lot of data about food insecurity, which is really just food insecurity as defined somewhere on my sheet is something like not able to get the healthy, culturally relevant food that you desire and need. And so we're working on collecting data on food insecurity and what are the barriers for people. And so as part of that, we've brought together people from many perspectives that have some role in the food system in Hampshire County. So normally when that would happen, you'd have, public health directors and social service agencies. You might have, if you're lucky, might get a farmer. You might have an elected official. Maybe some food pantry operators, people like that. We have gathered those folks, but we've also made a huge effort to get people who actually are experiencing food insecurity to be part of that process, and not just like one or two people, but like a huge group of them. And as part of that, we're actually meeting separately too with that group to help them kind of wrap their minds around what their role is and to give them some extra support. So when they come together with the people who are making a lot of these decisions, quite frankly, it's a more productive process for everyone. And so we've just begun this. It's kind of exciting, actually, to try to figure out when you put 25 people in a room who have these varying experiences and also hold very different types of knowledge about what the food system is and what should be done. So you have people who are looking at data and are sort of data nerds and like to look at maps and statistics, and then you have people who are like, well, I didn't have a meal this morning, and this is why not. And sharing that experience and that being its own value, held as equal to the people who have the statistics and the data. And when you have those people, I think, coming together, my deep belief is that you come up with a better solution if it's a well-facilitated process, which, fingers crossed, you can invite me back next year. I'll tell you what happened. So far, so good. I think GTC is an amazing, Gardening the Community is an amazing example of that from what I know in terms of really leading with community, building capacity, and especially empowering the youth to really drive that organization. So I have a lot of respect for that work. So I just want to say a couple more things briefly. When we talk about the food system, a lot of other aspects of other systems in our life have a huge impact on the food system, and that actually is what my work mostly looks like. You often can't look at a municipal level and say, at least a very tiny municipality, which is the ones I work in. Springfield and Holyoke and Northampton are a little different, but you often can't really pass a lot of policies that make a huge impact. And so what we often look at are what are the other policies that have an impact on food that aren't directly related to food. You know, so you look at like housing policy and where, say, let's say a town wants to build some affordable housing units, like where are they located and are they on a transit route? Can people walk to the store? Co-locating services are really important because once those housing units are built, you've got to, like, they're not going to, you know, you can't just like pick them up and move them. These are like bricks and mortar, and it can really make a difference for like the next, 30 years. And so oftentimes I'm talking to towns about that, and they're like looking at me like, this is not a, like, this is not an emergency. I'm like, it is. You don't understand. These impacts are huge for people. And looking at sidewalks and accessibility around food sites is really important. Land use policies is another one, like how you use your land, what you can do on the land. When cities and towns are built, like, can you do commercial enterprise or is it residential development? Can you farm? In the hill towns, there's a town in a tiny little town where if you have a garden that is, basically a little mini farm, you can't actually take that produce and sell it, at the end of your driveway. And that's prohibitive for people who want to make a little extra money. So that's a really great example of a policy that could be changed that then would allow that person to sell their produce. So, and that's really in the realm of land use. And I think in Springfield, there's probably a lot of examples of that around community gardening and where it's allowed and where it's not and how things need to change to really open up the grow food everywhere kind of mentality. So I think I'll wrap up, but I just want to say I just really believe very passionately that the community should be in the driver's seat. And I hope that that's like the one thing you take away, and that's like really, I would consider that an ethic in and of itself. So thank you.
So our last speaker for this afternoon's event is Neftali Duran, who leads the Nuestra Comida project at Nuestra Races, a grassroots urban agricultural organization that creates healthy environments and more equitable food system in New England by facilitating community leadership, education, food access, and policy change at the local, state, and national level. Neftali's work is informed by his own experience as a migrant worker and 18 years of experience in the restaurant industry as a chef, a baker, and a small business owner. He also educates communities around indigenous culinary traditions, the effects of migration on people and food, and synchronistic food styles that draw on Oaxacan roots. He's interested in documenting the culinary traditions of the different regions around his native Oaxaca, Mexico, as well as in reclaiming the roots and culture of the original peoples of the Americas. Neftali.
Can you all see me? I wore this shirt special today. So let me just say a little bit about Nuestra Races. Nuestra Races is a grassroots organization in the city of Holyoke, founded by Puerto Rican migrant farm workers, migrant, not immigrant. Very important distinction. The migrant workers that came to work in the fields, and right in this area, tobacco, uh, manufacturing in the city of Holyoke, silk, paper, and other things. Uh, a lot of these farm workers saw the need to grow their own food, so they founded Nuestra Raíz about 25 years ago, and to this day, right now we have about 14. Later this year we'll have about 17 community gardens, some of them in schools now, and it's a privilege and an honor to work with Nuestras Raíces. The work that I do is a little bit it takes the idea of growing food one step beyond. Meaning, I'm interested in exploring a lot more than just growing food. I'm interested in asking the question, why is there not good, affordable, healthy food in the city of Holyoke or Springfield? One of the words that I when Liz asked me to come to this talk, the question feels really big. What are the ethics of food? And one of the words that we use that is really important to recognize that has a lot to do with ethics, and that is important that sometimes I ask people to think about, equity. How many of us know the difference between equity and what's the other word? Equality. And I think about this in different ways. And I work with teenagers. So the way I explain it to teenagers, equality means that you all get a pair of Jordans, right? Equity means that you all get a pair of Jordans that are your size. That's the difference. When it comes to food and the food system, a food system that was born unethically, not only on the genocide of indigenous people, genocide and removal of indigenous peoples, but the slavery of black people, and a food system that is built for profit, not for the well-being of humans. One of the things that I was thinking about while I was sitting right there is a conversation that Lisa and I had recently about land access specifically to black and brown farmers. If we're talking about equity, you cannot. We were talking about equity. I don't know the numbers in Massachusetts right now, but we know that there's in the New York State, which is a pretty big state, there's about 10 black farmers. Think about that. 10. I don't know how many black farmers there are in Massachusetts. We'll find out. There aren't any? Right. So if we're talking about equity in the food system when it comes to land access, we have to think a little bit different. What I mean by that is that there's a lot of government programs or other initiatives in which you'll think about economic development or loans. You cannot do loans for land access when the system was built on excluding black farmers for a long, long time. Does that make sense? A system and policies along the way, including the GI Bill, that excluded the black farmers owning land. The food system, I mean, it's a really big question. Some of the ways that I like to explain the work that we hope to achieve is what a better food system, what an ethical food system means to me, to us. It's a food system that cares about health, the environment, agriculture, and labor. And if we start from the belief that food is a human right, which, by the way, the U.S. has never signed onto that agreement, international agreement, that food is a human right. If food is a human right and we want an ethical food system, we should care about health, meaning what we eat, meaning that in our communities like Springfield and Holyoke, the food that we have access to shouldn't be making us sick, shouldn't be giving us diabetes. You know, a lot of the issues, a lot of the illnesses that we deal with are preventable by having access to better food. The environment, a lot of the greenhouse gases in the U.S. and globally probably come from agriculture, meat production. I'm not asking I'm not asking you to give up meat. I'm asking you just to think about it. Why is meat so cheap? You know, agriculture, access to land. We just touched a little bit about that. The last one is one of my favorites. Labor. Who grows our food? Someone said machines. Sadly, no. Most of the food is grown by people. In the U.S., especially in this political climate, in which this administration, the rhetoric is that we should be deporting or building a wall, banning people like me, right? There's about 8 million undocumented people that work on the food system. That's growing the food, cooking the food, delivering the food, and everywhere else in between, about 8 million people. If you remove 8 million people out of that system, who's going to grow the food? Who's going to cook it? Who's going to, everything else that needs to happen in the system? That is a system that is not going to work, and it's unethical. It's really hard work. I don't know if any of you guys have tried being farming for a while. I did in Mexico. I did 3 years of in a coffee plantation. Months out of the year, not the full year. And I can tell you that that's when I decided that cooking was going to be easier than growing food. Just a couple of numbers out there. In North Carolina, for a worker to make $50 a day, they have to. You guys know the people that pick up the harvest or food, they get paid by the bucket often, right? Which means that they are not eligible for minimum wage, same as tipped workers. So if you work at a farm, minimum wage doesn't apply to you. Is that ethical? At 40 cents per bucket of sweet potatoes, which is a fifth-eighth of a bushel, a farm worker must pick and haul 2 tons of sweet potatoes a day to earn $50. Can you imagine that? Liz also touched on poverty. This system is a system built for profit. Therefore, it's going to be very, very. I don't care how much heart you have and how much you want to pursue the American dream. If you're making $50 a day, picking 2 tons of sweet potatoes, how viable is it going to be for you to go to college or to do anything else, right? That's really hard. Another thing that people don't think about is most of the people who grow our food or cook our food cannot afford it. That means that the system is not working. And if you cannot afford the food that you're growing or that you're cooking, that's not very ethical. Another aspect of that whole system is that there are big companies. One of them starts with a W. that they encourages and now have full-time people in the staff signing their coworkers for food stamps for SNAP, right? Which is one of the biggest companies that make the most profit of any. Another interesting fact that I used to learn recently is something called whitewashing, meaning the companies will donate a lot of money to food banks, to organizations. They'll partner with other organizations to basically whitewash their image. Because it's a lot more likely that when something happens, a scandal happens, they'll be okay if you do that work ahead of time. Another thing that I started thinking about recently is food that gets donated to soup kitchens, food banks, whatever you want. A lot of the food that gets donated is almost expired or dented, which means that companies are making a profit not only on the front end but on the back end. When they donate food to a soup kitchen, who's gonna sort it out? Usually it's gonna be volunteer labor, which means that you don't have to deal with it, that the company doesn't have to deal with it. They're having someone else deal with whatever they wanted to get rid of, and you get the tax break, right? So those are just some of the things that I've been thinking about. Is anyone familiar with another one that is that I like to to talk about because it's one of my personal experience. Economic policies they have pushed for people to migrate, and I'm a good example of that. Economic policies like NAFTA. They went into effect in '94. When NAFTA went into effect in '94, soon after, in Mexico, the market was flooded by cheap corn that is subsidized by the U.S. government. Therefore, families like mine, or families like many migrant workers, they came to the U.S. They were living from the land forever, for thousands of years, could not make a living anymore. Because when you flood markets with cheap corn that is subsidized, people cannot, you cannot make a living anymore. Therefore, you have to migrate. And when it comes to migration, something that we have to remember is that nobody in their right mind wants to leave their home. No mom, nobody in the right mind is gonna say like, oh, that looks really good over there. I'm gonna pick up my family and just leave and venture in this dangerous situation. You have to be desperate to do that. That's the reality of it. I don't want to take too much time, but I want to talk a little bit about policies. One of the things that I really like that I think about and that we're working on is local policies, state policies, and national policy. Local policies can be things like making sure that if people want to raise hens for eggs in the city of Springfield, people should be allowed to, right? Those are local policies that are important. Other things like thinking about the whole food system in a holistic way. If people should be allowed, and city governments should help with things like composting, right? Cities should make it easy for people to compost. That's just some things. At the state level, other conversations like why is there no black farmers? Right now, there's the implementation of something called the Massachusetts Food Plan is going to go into effect. It's a big document. If you please take a look at it, and and it's basically the next steps for for Massachusetts to create a better food system. Um, Take a look at it. It's it's interesting. Um, and in some I don't know if it's on that plan, but we also know now we also know that if you grow food in cities like Holyoke of Springfield, it's gonna be way better for the environment and for the people long term than if you grow in rural communities. And why that is because if you grow food in a community garden in a city where there's enough people, on average the food will travel on about 25 miles. That's it. It'll stay within a 25-mile radius, as opposed to a lettuce that we all eat that travels on average about 1,000 miles. That's a big difference. The other policy piece that I've been thinking about is the Farm Bill. Anyone familiar with the Farm Bill? The Farm Bill is this big piece of legislation that gets renewed about every 5 years, and it's up for renewal in 2018. And believe me, it affects all of us. There are some of the things that this bill and we all should care about. It's this bill is a bill in which like all the money for food and nutrition comes from, and we mean when we say food and nutrition, we're talking about SNAP, WIC, after-school programs, summer programs, emergency food, elderly food, and a bunch of other programs. School food, all of that money comes from there. And it's really important that in this political climate, there's no cuts to those programs. There is, if you are, something that we sometimes talk about is how to maintain people's, how to talk about all these issues and make sure that we are being respectful of people. We don't want to, on average right now, there's about 43.5 million people there are on SNAP in the U.S. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of our neighbors. Therefore, we should care. We should really make sure that none of those programs that are essential to families and children get cut. Some of the other things that come out of that bill are things that some of you guys may care about. Conservation. We're talking about park, farmland, all those things. Forestry, rural development, energy, research and extension, meaning the universities they get a little bit money for agricultural research, and there's other things. But in any case, there are. Let's explore that. And I have a lot of information that if you give me your email, I'll be happy to add you to my Google Drive. I'm gonna leave you with one last one. This one was a very interesting one that just came out last week for Sister Chavez Day, and as Sister Chavez said, it's never about the grapes or the lettuce. It's about people. There's an app the Food Chain Workers Alliance just put out last Cesar Chavez Day a few days ago. It's called the Hand That Feed Us. If you, it's a very cool app. You can download it. It's free, and there's a lot of information. There's a lot of information from meeting the people on the food chain to statistics to why would you care about the food system, what can you do, and worker stories. As I said before, it was one of the reasons why I do this work and I feel so passionate about is because I strongly believe that everyone should have access to good, healthy food. It should be a human right, and that's the ethical thing to do. Thank you.
Listening to Neftali and Sarah, I realize we are food wonks. We could just talk about food till it makes you lose your mind. And so I won't talk about it too much more. I want to ground a couple of things that Neftali said. To say that there are no black farmers in Massachusetts or to talk about black land loss is difficult without giving you some context. So in 1910, there were land that was owned by black farmers was at 15 million acres. And now it's at 2 million. And that's really profound. Just think about 1910 was 50 years less than 50 years post-slavery. And we owned 15 million acres of land, and about 1 in every 7 farmers was black. And now it's about 1 in 80. And so you can grab hold of that in a way. And I'll say the name of the store because they advertise it as one of their benefits. Walmart has hired people to help their employees apply for SNAP. SNAP is food stamps. And they tout that as a benefit. And no one stops to, I knew that that didn't hit because he was, maybe he has more money than me. He's afraid of being sued. I don't have any money, so they can come. But that's like a huge thing. Can you imagine those of you who work at Bay Path or students at Bay Path, if on your way to HR there was someone sitting in the hallway to say, hey, let me help you with your food stamp application? Like at your workplace, what does that mean? So we gave you a lot of these big facts that are kind of depressing. But there's really cool stuff happening. So I talked about little gardening in the community, but on a systems level in Springfield, in the last 2 years, we have made profound changes in our school system with our school food service provider. We're a city where everybody eats free breakfast and lunch because the poverty levels are so high. And so I've worked really hard to become friends with the men who make their money, because they are all men for whatever reason, who run Sodexo. And we have gone from having 10% of the produce that we feed our kids, it's going to this year hit 35%. 35% of the produce that kids eat come from within 50 miles in the valley. Imagine the impact on local farmers. Every school, by the end of next year, will have a salad bar in it. 3 years ago, we had none. Right now, 28 of our schools have school gardens. That's why I teach school gardening, because I did it for free, and now parents are running the school gardens, and kids take the food home, and in the summertime, they come to the school, and they grow the food, and families take food home. This Thanksgiving, 38 families had vegetables that their kids grew. These are really little numbers, but we're this ragtag little city where, and I'm one little person, and I'm really not anybody special, except that I have a 7-year-old boy who plays with her 5-year-old boy, and we want the world to be different for them. So if one lady who has no background in food policy, whose parents didn't finish high school, can convince a school district that's we're the second largest district in the state, because in Boston they're all broken up. We're the 3rd largest city. So I had no experience in food, no network in food, up until about 4 or 5 years ago. And I've gotten the school district to now put in their procurement policy that any food service provider forever who comes to get a bid, and those of you who, Dr. Leary, you know, that's a lot of money, they have to agree to sustain the school gardening program, and they've committed that in 5 years, every single school in Springfield will have a school garden. Boston is nowhere close to that. And we're this little, and you're our friends here locally who are helping make that happen, because you gave me wheelbarrows. Those are really small micro things, but change is possible. And so you just have to start dreaming. And one of my favorite quotes, I read children's books all the time. I read them before I became a mom, but I read them now because they're fast and I can feel a sense of accomplishment. And this is from The Little Princess. If nature has made you for a giver, your hands are born open and so is your heart. If nature has made you for a giver, your hands are born open. Those of you who've had babies and seen them born, or watched other people's babies born, or watched it on a movie, we always come out like this, waiting. If a nature has made you for a giver, your hands are born open and so is your heart. Think about the little children that you know, they love you. Babies look up at you, they've never seen you before, and they're just looking with like, pick me up and take me and love me because I already love you. And though there may be times when your hands are empty and your heart is always full, you can give things out of that. So if you take away nothing else from this talk, think about these big things and then break them up. It's a big old elephant, like most of the problems in our world are. But all it takes is a little bit of chewing, and we can whittle away at that. I'm so grateful to have spent this time with you. I've spent it with my friends. I'm so grateful that you stayed awake in this rainy kind of lull time in the afternoon. Again, Footer family, thank you very much. Bay Path family, I am always eternally grateful to spend time with you. Think about the changes that you can make. You're already living an ethical life. Like the first step was to come listen to this talk on a Tuesday, late rainy afternoon. Bless you. Goodwill.